It begins with a fragment, grainy film stock found in a forgotten NATO vault in Brussels, stamped Restricted Eclipse. The footage shows a silent convoy moving through the ruins of Berlin, spring 1945. British and American trucks, headlights blacked out, crawling past burning buildings. No insignia, no visible markings, only a single banner scrawled with the words Joint Recovery Detachment, 12th Army Group. The film ends abruptly, the final frame frozen on an officer with his face obscured by light. Official archives list no such detachment. Its orders, mission logs, and personnel files remain sealed. For decades, the name Operation Eclipse has been dismissed as post-war rumor, but inside classified briefings and redacted correspondence between the OSS, MI6, and the Soviet NKVD, the same codename surfaces again and again, connected to missing archives, unexplained deaths, and a secret no one was meant to unearth. Chapter 1: Operation Eclipse, the hidden war for Berlin. On April 23, 1945, as the Red Army closed its encirclement around Berlin, an unmarked convoy left Allied headquarters in Reims under direct authorization from Shaif Command. Its manifest was labeled only Operation Eclipse. The detachment consisted of 22 men, American, British, and one Polish linguist, commanded by Colonel Arthur Keane of the OSS's Special Activities Division. Their orders, signed by General Eisenhower himself, were classified under strategic recovery. To the press, the Allies were preparing to take the German capital. In reality, Keane's unit had been assigned a different task: to locate and secure high-value Nazi research before the Soviets reached it. They moved fast, using back roads through Dessau and Wittenberg. Each vehicle carried sealed crates of communications gear and a small printing press for document reproduction. According to declassified logistics memos, the group's supply requisitions included 400 meters of lead-lined sheeting and portable Geiger counters, odd materials for a simple intelligence mission. The convoy's radio operator, Lieutenant Raymond Heller, logged coded transmissions from ECL-5, believed to be MI6 liaisons operating out of Hamburg. His notes, recovered years later, describe a single repeated instruction: proceed to objective Morgenrot, secure all contents, eliminate duplication. On April 29th, Eclipse crossed into the southern outskirts of Berlin under cover of an RAF bombing raid. They set up a temporary command post in the ruins of the Ministry of Armaments. Witnesses later reported men in civilian clothing moving crates from an underground vault beneath Wilhelmstrasse 92, the same location where Albert Speer's office once stood. Heller's final entry reads, "Found the chamber. Symbols match file sketches. Keane ordered immediate lockdown. Soviet 6 km east. No radio contact since 0300. When Soviet forces entered the district 2 days later, they found no trace of Keane's unit. The building had been gutted by fire, its sub-basements sealed with concrete. Only a few melted dog tags and fragments of Allied radio parts were recovered. The NKVD's field report, declassified in 1991, mentioned foreign agents of unknown allegiance, seen removing bound documents marked Sonderprojekt Morgenrot, Special Project Dawn. These files allegedly detailed experiments conducted by the Reich Main Security Office in late 1944 concerning reactive atomic dispersal and applied psychological containment. Stalin personally ordered their transfer to Moscow. No Soviet archive has ever confirmed their existence. In 1946, the US War Department declared all Operation Eclipse personnel missing, presumed dead. Yet 3 years later, a classified Army intelligence memo titled Eclipse Follow-Up 3A surfaced in the Pentagon's archives. It referenced an asset in Prague, claiming to have seen Keane alive, operating under a new identity. Attached was a blurred photograph of a man entering the US Embassy compound, wearing a colonel's insignia but no name tag. The report was stamped, closed, insufficient verification. The British records tell a different story. MI6 file HN 418, released briefly in 1987 before being withdrawn, contains a letter dated July 1945 from a Captain Edmund Strathmore to his superior. Recovered materials from ECL Group delivered as instructed contained mixed German-English correspondence concerning Alpine transfer operations, recommend suppression, too much overlap with pre-existing arrangements. The document ends with a single handwritten note. Eclipse's objective was not recovery, it was sanitization. Surviving relatives of the Eclipse team received only standard condolences and nondescript medals. No mission details, no bodies returned. One widow, Margaret Heller, the wife of Lieutenant Raymond Heller, reported receiving an unmarked envelope in 1948 containing her husband's wedding ring and a strip of undeveloped film. When processed, the negatives showed several men in US uniforms standing before a massive vault door bearing the Reichsadler and a red stencil. Morgenrot, verboten. Behind them, faint in the shadows, a man in Soviet field gear appeared to be watching. The provenance of the photographs remains disputed. Official channels deny their authenticity. During the Cold War, eclipse became a whisper, a classified myth circulating among NATO analysts and Soviet counterintelligence officers. The CIA's internal index references it only twice, both times in relation to post-war competitive recovery operations. One 1958 assessment by the Directorate of Plans states, "Residual influence of Operation Eclipse visible in Soviet duplicative acquisition patterns. Priority, maintain plausible deniability." The British equivalent, the Foreign Office's Epsilon file, was destroyed in a fire in 1962, though no insurance record exists of the incident. In 1971, a former G2 archivist named Donald Price publicly claimed that a secret vault beneath Tempelhof Airport contained the lost Eclipse crates. He was later found dead in his London flat, cause of death officially listed as cardiac failure. Unreleased police photos, leaked decades later, show his apartment ransacked, papers scattered, safe pried open. Among the remaining documents was a carbon copy of an OSS inventory list, ECL-12, Morgenrot subfiles 1-9, psych weapon trials, human factors testing, unverified atomic dispersal protocols. Handwritten at the bottom, in faded blue ink, were two words: Keen confirmed. To this day, Operation Eclipse remains absent from official Allied records. Requests for information through the Freedom of Information Act are met with standard denials citing national security. The few declassified scraps point toward a mission that began as a recovery effort but transformed into something else entirely, a silent purge of evidence that both sides wanted buried. Each government continues to insist that Eclipse was an administrative code name for the Berlin occupation transition. Yet in 2014, a private historian examining US Army Signal Corps archives discovered a misfiled recording labeled Berlin 45 ECL. It contained 3 minutes of radio chatter between unidentified operatives, including one voice matching Keen's known accent. The final transmission, timestamped May 2nd, 1945, reads, "Objective secured. Secondary team approaching from east. No further contact after this, destroying records. Eclipse closing, then silence." The recording ends with a faint echo, a Soviet call sign overlapping the Allied frequency, and a single coded phrase repeated twice, "Morgenrot complete." Whatever was sealed beneath the ruins of Berlin, Operation Eclipse ensured it would never reach daylight. Chapter 2. The Ghost Convoy of the Baltic Sea. In the cold grey waters off Bornholm Island, the sea keeps its secrets well. Between March and May of 1946, British naval patrols reported a series of radar anomalies off the southern Baltic coast. Small, coordinated blips moving as if in convoy formation, then vanishing without trace. To the untrained eye, it might have been dismissed as interference. But to the Admiralty's intelligence branch, the signatures match something remarkable. The exact configuration of Cometgruppe 47 Harms, a Kriegsmarine flotilla believed destroyed a year earlier while attempting to evacuate from Lübeck. Officially, the group never reached open waters. Unofficially, it was carrying a cargo marked in German archives as nationally significant. The final known record of Cometgruppe 47 dates to May 2nd, 1945. At 22:40, the harbour master of Lübeck logged the departure of 3 vessels. The SS Albert Ehrensperger, a converted hospital ship, U-909B, a Type White Sea submarine unlisted in Allied U-boat registries, and a supply tender identified only by its deck code, Scharf 17. A convoy clearance was granted under orders bearing the signature of Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz himself. The stated mission, medical evacuation to Copenhagen. But the port manifests, recovered decades later from Bundesarchiv microfilm, contain redacted lines under special cargo. Each entry was sealed with the initials KW, known to belong to Korvettenkapitän Klaus Wender, head of the Reich's Naval Intelligence Branch for the Baltic. The convoy was last sighted at dawn, 12 nautical miles east of Fehmarn. No distress signals were received and no debris was found. The Baltic was turbulent that week. Mines, Soviet aircraft, collapsing command structures, but the total absence of wreckage raised suspicions even then. By 1948, a quiet directive from British Naval Intelligence ordered continued monitoring of Bornholm's radar channel. The reports continued. Ghost echoes, flickering movements that never resolved into solid targets. Locals began calling the phenomenon Das Gespenster Convoy, the ghost convoy. When divers from the Royal Navy finally returned in 1972 as part of a joint NATO oceanographic survey, they were told to focus on environmental mapping. What they found told a different story. Sonar scans revealed 3 wrecks resting at a depth of 110 meters, aligned in perfect convoy order. The hull markings matched Albert Ehrensperger, U-909B, and Scharf 17 now, but the photographs raised more questions than they answered. The hospital ship's lower decks had been stripped of all medical equipment. Its interior bulkheads were reinforced with heavy plating, some of it lead-lined. Geiger readings spiked briefly, then dropped back to normal, too quickly to be dismissed as natural. Declassified British after-action reports described the discovery of sealed crates, approximately 1 meter square, constructed of steel and zinc composite, bearing no serial numbers. The crates were removed under direct supervision of Commander Peter Allardyce of the Admiralty Research Division. His personal diary, later leaked in fragments, notes, cargo retrieved under pressure from higher authorities. Soviet observers present, insistent on equal custody. Situation highly irregular. 2 crates removed to HMS Renown, others confiscated by Soviet naval attaché. The Soviet ship Slava departed the area the next day. NATO's access was revoked within a week. Official communiqué reduced the incident to an unremarkable wreck recovery. But in the months following the dive, multiple members of the survey team reported intense radiation sickness and neurological symptoms inconsistent with known exposures. No deaths were recorded publicly. Yet Allardyce retired abruptly, citing psychological fatigue, and later told an interviewer in 1980, "We didn't find a convoy. We found a shipment meant never to surface again." What was inside those crates remains unknown. Western analysts speculated that they contained stolen uranium from the Reich's experimental facilities in Oranienburg, or precious metals looted from occupied territories. Others proposed a darker theory, that Cometgruppe 47 Worms had been carrying personnel linked to the SS Ahnenerbe's Heritage Division, responsible for occult and pseudo-scientific research. A Soviet defector in 1969 claimed Moscow had recovered biological archives from one of the vessels, though no corroborating evidence has ever surfaced. The British file, ADM 23211, references a post-mission meeting between MI6's Baltic section and representatives from the US Navy. The memo reads, "Intelligence consensus indicates cargo not material but human. Several names redacted. Repatriation denied." A margin note, written in pencil, adds cryptically, "Living manifests. Subject classification remains beyond jurisdiction." The last surviving officer associated with the mission, Lieutenant Henry Parkhurst, was interviewed in 1994 by a maritime historian. When asked about the crates, Parkhurst paused for nearly a minute before replying, "They were heavier than they should have been, and they were warm." He died 3 weeks later, officially of pneumonia. When post-Soviet archives opened briefly in 1992, researchers uncovered fragments of an NKVD dispatch labeled File 7 Bornholm. The summary, though heavily redacted, mentioned the successful containment of hostile scientific assets and recommended continued blackout cooperation with Western counterparts to prevent political fallout. Among the appendices was a photographic negative showing a body bag marked with both Cyrillic and English stencils. To this day, sonar readings in the Bornholm Trench occasionally register unexplained mechanical noise. In 2003, a Swedish marine research team reported low-frequency pulses emanating from coordinates matching the 1972 wrecks. NATO dismissed the findings as equipment interference. Local fishermen continue to avoid the area, calling it the silent field. And yet, the files persist. A US Navy intelligence summary dated 1951, unsealed accidentally during a mass declassification, concludes with an extraordinary line. Operation Cometgruppe termination inconclusive. If recovered subjects remain viable, advise total discretion. Memory suppression procedures to be enacted where necessary. In official records, Cometgruppe 47 is a historical footnote, a lost convoy in chaotic days. But among those who've seen the documents, the whispers are different. Some say the ships were fleeing not the Allies, but a research division gone rogue. Others insist they carried something that could not be allowed to reach the hands of any victor. The Baltic holds no graves, only silence. And beneath that silence, perhaps still, the slow decay of a secret meant never to rise to the surface again. Chapter 3. Project Lantern, the American Harvest of Minds. In the summer of 1947, as the Nuremberg tribunals wound down and Europe staggered toward reconstruction, a quiet transition unfolded within the Office of Strategic Services remnants. The OSS had officially dissolved 2 years earlier, its operations absorbed by the newly created Central Intelligence Group, the forerunner of the CIA. Yet within that bureaucratic shuffle, a small and unremarkable department under the innocuous title Psychological Evaluation and Processing Section began issuing travel orders across the occupied zones. Those orders bore one identifying tag: Lantern. Publicly, the team's mission was to track propaganda specialists, behavioral researchers, and scientists who had worked for the Reich's Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. Behind closed doors, their remit was far broader. Project Lantern sought individuals associated with AMT-10, a covert SS division that had conducted psychophysical compliance studies between 1942 and 1945. It was one of several programs that disappeared as the war ended, its research files scattered across Berlin, Prague, and Vienna. The Americans weren't alone in their pursuit. Soviet counterparts under the NKVD's Department 12 were conducting parallel sweeps, often arriving only hours apart. But while Moscow preferred extradition and interrogation, Washington's approach was assimilation. Lantern's operational hub was located at Camp King, near Oberursel, in the American occupation zone. The facility had served as a Luftwaffe interrogation center during the war. Now, it was refitted under the guidance of Colonel Paul Schreiber, a former army psychiatrist with ties to the OSS's Morale Research Unit. The staff roster lists fewer than 50 names, many of which remain redacted. Declassified payroll sheets reveal payments routed through civilian front companies such as the Boston Research Consortium and Northwood Educational. Exchange, both traced later to CIA funding. Channels. Surviving documents describe the arrival of the first AMT-10 detainees in October 1947. Among them was Dr. Wilhelm Kattner, a neurologist formerly stationed at Ravensbrück, and his assistant, Liesel Brandt, age 23. Their work had allegedly focused on coercive suggestibility in stress environments. A memorandum from Schreiber to Washington noted, subjects display advanced techniques for rapid ideological imprinting, of immense potential value to national security. The phrasing, though clinical, hinted at something darker. In early 1948, Lantern expanded to include Operation Paperclip personnel. Officially, these scientists were brought to the United States to advance aeronautics and rocketry. Unofficially, several were funneled through Lantern's Human Factors Division, testing methodologies of interrogation and cognitive disruption. A recovered letter from Major Gerald T. Barr, dated December 12, 1948, to his superior at the Psychological Strategy Board reads, Lantern protocols progressing beyond theoretical. Kattner's conditioning framework adapted for accelerated debriefs. Subjects maintain fragmented recall. Recommend continued discretion under civilian supervision. One of the few surviving field agents, Captain Joseph Delano, kept a private journal later seized by Army intelligence. His entry from February 1949 describes a trial involving 4 subjects, Eastern European origin, exposure to alternating sensory deprivation and induced fear stimuli. The stated goal, to collapse loyalty structure within 48 hours. Delano's notes end abruptly after April of that year, replaced with a typed summary prepared by an unknown author. Agent transferred stateside. No further entries. When the Central Intelligence Agency was officially established in 1947, Lantern slipped quietly beneath its wing, folded into the Directorate of Science and Technology. A top-secret budget line labeled Behavioral Sciences Support Program received funding increases every fiscal year through 1953. Later investigations suggest that Lantern's research directly informed, Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke, precursors to the notorious MK Ultra. Yet none of those later projects acknowledge Lantern by name, as though the foundation itself had been erased. Chilling detail emerges from the so-called Katna collection, a set of 23 photographs, found in a University of Maryland archive mislabeled as post-war hospital studies. The images show men and women seated in metal chairs, heads wired to crude electrode arrays, eyes forced open with surgical clamps. Behind them, a blackboard reads L sequence B, compliance drift 9H. A marginal note in the archive register adds, recovered Camp King, 1952, origin uncertain. By 1951, Project Lantern had quietly migrated to American soil. The former Fort Detrick facility in Maryland became its stateside hub, designated Installation 12C. Civilian contractors were brought in under academic pretenses, running what appeared to be psychological experiments on volunteers. But according to an internal memo dated November 3rd, 1951, signed by a Dr. H. Moritz, several subjects were non-consensual assets transferred from overseas. That line was redacted in subsequent copies, though the carbon imprint remained faintly visible. Congressional inquiry in 1952 requested documentation on any wartime psychological research imported from enemy nations. The Defense Department's response was categorical. No such programs exist under American jurisdiction. Yet 6 months later, on July 9, 1953, an internal CIA briefing, classified until 2004, stated, Lantern's methodologies successfully integrated into ongoing behavioral studies. Recommend all references expunged to preserve plausible lineage. The phrasing, plausible lineage, suggested a deliberate rewriting of history. In 1961, a researcher named Dr. Helen Rowe from the Rand Corporation stumbled across a cache of Lantern documents while reviewing old Signal Corps material. Her discovery was never published, but her personal correspondence, later declassified, includes a line that continues to trouble historians. These were not Nazi crimes borrowed for study. They were collaborations resumed under new flags. A week later, she resigned from Rand and vanished from public record. Lantern's final traces disappear after 1964, when a fire destroyed several buildings at Fort Detrick, including the storage wing that held classified behavioral materials. The official cause was an electrical malfunction. However, one photograph taken by a local journalist shows men in civilian suits removing metal canisters from the site hours before the fire began. The journalist's name, Robert Flynn, later appeared on an FBI watch list related to unauthorized possession of government property. When fragments of Project Lantern were finally revealed through declassification in 2002, historians expected confirmation of post-war research continuity. What they found instead were hollow shells, memos with blacked-out pages, empty folders, and index entries that simply read, Destroyed by Authority 84. Yet one unmarked envelope, tucked inside an unrelated Air Force file, contained a single page dated 1949. Subjects display accelerated compliance response. Recommend continuation under civilian cover. No signature, no letterhead, just a cryptic initial at the bottom, K. Some speculate it belonged to Colonel Keane of Operation Eclipse, linking two seemingly separate operations under a single unseen directive. If true, it would mean that the harvest of minds begun in the ashes of the Third Reich had continued far beyond Berlin, quietly, clinically, and with the approval of those sworn to bury its origin. Chapter 4. The Iron Cross Network. Odessa Reimagined. In the chaotic twilight of 1945, while Allied authorities in Europe busied themselves dismantling the remains of Hitler's war machine, another network was quietly assembling from the fragments. It did not move under the swastika, nor through Vatican protection routes to Argentina or Chile. It moved instead under a different symbol, an iron cross drawn within a circle, the insignia of an organization that identified itself only by a single code name. Eisenkreuz. In English, the Iron Cross Network. The first confirmed mention of Eisenkreuz appears in an intercepted Abwehr memorandum dated May 22, 1945, weeks after Germany's unconditional surrender. The memo, retrieved from an abandoned intelligence post in Innsbruck, described a financial and operational reconstitution effort coordinated by senior economic officers of the disbanded Wehrmacht. Names were redacted by the Americans upon discovery, but an unaltered Soviet copy lists Oberstleutnant Hans Kruger, formerly attached to the Reich's Armaments Ministry, and Major Otto Voss, a logistics planner once assigned to Army Group South. Both men vanished in Austria that summer. Allied records list them as presumed dead. What made Eisenkreuz distinct from the more familiar Odessa network was its objective. While Odessa focused on exfiltration and survival, moving SS officers and collaborators to safe havens abroad, Eisenkreuz focused on reabsorption. It sought to infiltrate the administrative and military organs of post-war Europe, embedding remnants of Nazi expertise and capital into the emerging geopolitical order. It was, as one declassified MI6 cable phrased it, a shadow state seeking reincorporation through the arteries of the Cold War. Evidence suggests that Eisenkreuz began in the Tyrolean Alps, using abandoned Luftwaffe depots as way stations. A financial trail uncovered in 1951 by Swiss authorities linked a series of dormant accounts at the Zürcher Kantonalbank to shell companies registered in Liechtenstein under the name Alpenverein Logistics GmbH. The company's directors were impossible to trace. Its accounts received large gold deposits between August 1945 and February 1946. A British Bank of England report later estimated that nearly 12 tons of Reich gold were moved through these channels. By 1947, Allied intelligence had identified at least 4 cells operating under the Eisenkreuz umbrella. Each had a specific function: financing, communications, political liaison, and strategic reintegration. The last referred to the recruitment of former military strategists and intelligence officers into Western defense networks. Some found their way into the newly formed Bundeswehr, others into the nascent NATO structure. Declassified CIA files indicate that at least a dozen former Eisenkreuz operatives were absorbed into Operation Lattice, a covert collaboration between Western intelligence agencies aimed at organizing clandestine, stay-behind armies in case of Soviet invasion. Memorandum from 1951 signed by Allen Dulles reads, "Certain German assets with anti-communist credentials to be retained and directed for future contingency roles. Eisenkreuz apparatus provides ready-made structure. Recommend quiet assimilation under Allied oversight." The memo's second page, heavily censored, bears a handwritten edition. Funding to remain compartmentalized through lattice intermediaries. It appears that Dulles and other Western intelligence officials saw Eisenkreuz not as a threat, but as a convenient tool, a network of disciplined operatives already fluent in espionage and counterintelligence, motivated by hatred of the Soviets and a shared interest in survival. The Soviets were aware. A 1953 KGB counterintelligence bulletin labeled Eisenkreuz, a capitalist reanimation of the fascist order. Soviet agents tracked the network's suspected operatives in Vienna and Zurich, but their reports show frustration. One file notes, subject speaks fluent Russian, displays awareness of surveillance techniques, indicates Western protection. In several cases, witnesses and informants disappeared within weeks of contact. By 1957, the Iron Cross network had evolved into something more abstract. The original founders had either died, fled, or merged into legitimate government structures. What remained was a web of financial and political influence, stretching from Bonn to Buenos Aires. A rare fragment of an Austrian Ministry of Interior report from 1962 mentions corporate fronts aligned with Eisenkreuz, veterans funding anti-communist resistance in Eastern Europe. Among the recipients was a group known as Organisation Galen, the same intelligence apparatus that would form the backbone of West Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, BND. One of the most striking pieces of evidence linking Eisenkreuz to Western operations is a declassified NATO memorandum labeled Lattice 2299. It details a 1959 meeting in Brussels between representatives from the CIA, MI6, and the Italian SIFAR agency. The agenda: review of stay-behind unit coordination, funding, and communications. The final page bears a note. Certain German liaison officers, Rettebauers, demonstrated exceptional operational discipline. Recommend continued collaboration with EK network elements. The EK network was shorthand for Eisenkreuz. When journalist Günther Meinhardt published an exposé in Der Spiegel in 1972 titled The Invisible Reich, He cited anonymous sources claiming that Eisenkreuz had directly influenced European elections during the early Cold War. 2 weeks later, Meinhardt was killed in a car crash outside Salzburg. His surviving notes, released posthumously, referenced a single document labeled EK Ledger. He described it as a directory of names and accounts linking post-war politicians, bankers, and industrialists to the original network. That ledger reappeared briefly in 1993, when Austrian police investigating a bank collapse discovered a sealed chamber beneath the former offices of Alpenverein Logistics. Inside were 18 metal boxes filled with rotting paper, old currency, and typewritten lists. One box bore the inscription, EK Verzeichnis 1954. According to the forensic inventory, half of the papers disintegrated on contact. The rest were confiscated by Austrian intelligence. For 48 hours, the ledger existed within official custody, then vanished. No record of its transfer or destruction remains. Several names from partial photocopies have surfaced over the years. Franz Reisner, later a NATO advisor, Dr. Lothar Beck, a chemist linked to pharmaceutical development for US military contractors, and Helmut Kruger, the same man believed to have founded Eisenkreuz. In 1945, the final reference to the Iron Cross network appears in a 2001 European Commission report investigating Cold War paramilitary organizations. In a redacted appendix, paragraph 7 reads, Eisenkreuz served as both precursor and liaison structure to several Western clandestine operations. Its dissolution unverified. Current activity indeterminate. The phrasing, clinical, detached, belied the unease behind it. Some historians believe Eisenkreuz never truly dissolved. Its members, absorbed into legitimate structures, became indistinguishable from the bureaucratic machinery they once opposed. Others suggest it transformed into something far larger, a financial intelligence shadow operating across continents. And somewhere, deep within that vanished ledger, were names that still hold power. Diplomats, industrial magnates, intelligence officers, figures who shaped Europe's post-war destiny under the pretense of peace, all bound by a single symbol from a war that never quite ended, the Iron Cross within a circle. Chapter 5, The Siberian Silence, Lost Division of the Reich. In February 1945, as the Third Reich crumbled under the Allied advance, an encrypted Wehrmacht transmission was intercepted by British codebreakers at Bletchley Park. It was routine traffic at first, supply requests, unit redeployments, but one line stood out. The message originated from Division 502, Sonderforschungseinheit Ost, Special Research Unit East, operating near Königsberg. Its content was brief, clinical, and chilling. Proceed to Borealis extraction zone. Priority absolute. Communications, silence effective immediately. The intercept was filed under miscellaneous, unverified. No unit designated Division 502 appeared in German order of battle charts. After that date, no further signals from the unit were ever recorded. The post-war years brought scattered whispers about an Eastern Ghost Division that vanished without trace. Soviet archives, declassified in fragments after 1991, provide partial glimpses. An NKVD situation report from March 1945, labeled Operation Pro-Rêvemois Breakthrough, describes Soviet patrols encountering German remnants retreating along the Angrapa River toward the east, not west as expected. The report mentions non-standard insignia, black sun over polar star, an emblem never documented in known Wehrmacht heraldry. The pursuing Soviet battalion, 33rd Guards Rifle Regiment, reported heavy fog and geomagnetic interference that disrupted radio contact for 48 hours. When communication resumed, the regiment was missing 37 men and reported no sign of the Germans. Officially, the Red Army declared the Königsberg pocket closed by April 9, 1945. Yet scattered field diaries recovered years later in Soviet custody suggest something different. One such diary, belonging to Captain Lev Andreev, describes a nighttime engagement near Lake Neyman. Strange light in the forest. Heard engines but not of trucks. Constant low whine. Locals call it Die Silbernen. Ground shook once. In the morning, only tire marks leading east toward the frozen marshes. His entry ends abruptly. For decades, the story would have remained a myth if not for the 1988 expedition by the Soviet Geological Institute. Conducting magnetic anomaly surveys along the northern shore of Lake Baikal, researchers discovered metallic readings inconsistent with natural formations, cylindrical structures buried deep beneath the permafrost. When a core sample was extracted, they found fragments of German steel alloy bearing serial numbers. Beginning with RH502, the team logged the find as anomaly Nord 7 and reported it to the KGB's Science and Technology Directorate. Within days, the area was sealed under military jurisdiction, declassified. Communications between the KGB and the Ministry of Defense reveal that Nord 7 was categorized as a historical material anomaly of atomic significance. A mobile lab unit was dispatched from Irkutsk, led by Colonel Viktor Asayev, an expert in radiological safety. His report, dated December 12, 1988, reads, "Recovered debris consistent with early fission research materials. Found sections of armored plating stamped with Reich Eagle insignia. No biological remains. Radiation elevated but localized. Recommend containment." The site was subsequently encased in concrete and declared off-limits to civilians. Western intelligence caught wind of the operation only through indirect means. In 1989, a CIA SIGINT intercept out of Vladivostok recorded encrypted military chatter referencing Project Naval Legacy. That phrase corresponded to a little-known German initiative from 1944, Project Naval, or Project Fog, a program rumored to involve experimental atmospheric weapons designed to disrupt radar and communications. The British had dismissed it as pseudoscience, but the convergence of names, Division 502, Borealis Zone, Nebel, suggested an unbroken chain of research fleeing west to east as the Reich collapsed. A year later, in late 1990, during permafrost thawing, a Soviet geologist named Yuri Sidorov stumbled upon a partially unearthed metal plate near the Nord 7 exclusion zone. The plate bore German Gothic script etched beneath layers of corrosion. "Wir leben noch," "We are still alive." Sidorov turned the fragment over to local authorities. Within 48 hours, he disappeared. His family was relocated to an undisclosed location. The incident was logged internally as Personnel Reassignment Security Protocol Z. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, fragments of Nord 7 documentation surfaced on the black market. Among them was a set of Polaroid photos showing frozen terrain littered with twisted machinery, tank treads unlike any known German model, and what appeared to be modular shelters partially melted into the ice. One image, marked Frame 6B, shows a helmet bearing the 502 insignia resting atop a frozen rifle. The metadata on the film suggested exposure dates consistent with 1945, not 1988. Experts remain divided, artifact or forgery. The CIA briefly investigated under Operation Glacial Echo, deploying a small satellite over the Baikal region. Declassified imagery from 1992 shows faint rectangular shadows beneath the ice shelf, too regular to be natural. Subsequent scans showed nothing. The formations had vanished, possibly covered by shifting permafrost or deliberately removed. The agency's final report concludes, "No verifiable structure present. Recommend file closure. Continue passive monitoring for anomalous radio frequencies." But monitoring continued. In 1994, a Swedish amateur radio operator detected faint Morse bursts on a Cold War emergency frequency reserved for distress calls. The transmission repeated every 6 hours, its signal originating from coordinates near the Baikal exclusion zone. The content was simple, unnerving. "Wir leben noch." Soviet-era transmission equipment could not have survived that long beneath ice. Forensic linguists who analyzed the signal claimed the rhythm of the Morse suggested human tapping, not automated code. Yet subsequent expeditions found no hardware, no power source, and no trace of human presence. In 1998, Russian security forces destroyed the old Nord 7 site, citing environmental hazards. Satellite images taken 2 weeks later showed a new concrete facility under construction, a rectangular bunker with no signage. Within months, it was erased from maps. 2007 leak of internal Russian ministry documents referenced Borealis Relocation Archive listing destroyed. Files from 1945 onward under classifications involving foreign scientific military material. One note, written in pen across a faded logbook page, reads, "The division reached its destination. Orders executed. Silence maintained." Historians debate whether Division 502 truly existed or was a fabrication born of wartime chaos. The consistency of records, however, serial codes, intercepted transmissions, and post-war discoveries suggest something tangible moved east in those last days. The question remains, what were they carrying? Some propose advanced research from Project Nabal, an atmospheric manipulation device or primitive radiological dispersal weapon. Others believe it was personnel, scientists and engineers bound for Japanese-occupied Manchuria, continuing their experiments under the Kwantung Army before Soviet capture. Yet no Japanese or Soviet documents confirm any arrivals. As of today, Nord 7 remains a restricted zone. Satellite imaging shows intermittent thermal anomalies each winter, as if something deep beneath the ice still generates faint heat. The radio frequency once carrying the Wir leben noch signal has been silent since 2012, though every few years, amateur operators report strange bursts, a brief pulse followed by static. In the end, the Siberian silence is less about what was found than what remains missing. A division without a grave, a message without a sender, and a war that may never have ended for those who marched east into the snow, chasing a promise written in code. If the transmission was real, it means at least one of them, or what they became, still remembers. And perhaps, beneath that endless ice, the last soldiers of the Reich are still waiting to be found. The record ends not with answers, but with silence. A silence that stretches from the ruins of Berlin to the depths of Lake Baikal, from the unmarked ledges of Vienna to the sealed bunkers beneath Maryland. Each recovered scrap, each blurred photograph, each whispered transmission forms only the outline of a truth buried too deliberately to surface. If Operation Eclipse, Comet Gruppe 47, Project Lantern, Eisenkreuz, and Division 502 were threads of a single design, then the tapestry they wove was never meant to be seen. The files remain locked, the witnesses long gone, and yet the same names continue to flicker in newly opened archives. Someone, somewhere, is still curating the silence, and until that silence breaks, the question lingers like a low hum in the static. What if the war never really ended, but simply changed its uniform?